Okay, I think that's working. Now we're going to share. Oh. Okay, one more second. All right, I'll need you to put your listening ears on because I can't call up the document that has the class notes. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but we will prevail. Let's talk about unification. This is what Rabbi Kaplan has to say. Unification meditation, it is a form of meditation, and it deals with saying the Shema. The most ancient and most important Jewish prayer is the Shema. This prayer consists of the words Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Listen, Israel, Adonai our God, Adonai is one. The words themselves are taken from the Torah, from Devarim. In many ways, this sentence can be looked upon as the most important verse in the Torah. Bold statement. First, the Torah designates that it be recited twice every day, in the morning and in the evening. It is also the key element in the parchment of the tefillin that are worn during daily worship, as well as in the mezuzah that is affixed to the doorpost. And if you recall, in then a past lesson we mentioned that the mezuzah, the tefillin, are reminders to be mindful. They trigger us, they remind us to be mindful of following the mitzvot and what is our heritage. And so it's significant to ask what is inside the mezuzah, what is inside the tefillin versus of the Shema. Okay. So we are to be mindful, not of in the general sense of what our jobs are, but in particular of the Shema. The Shema is more than just a prayer. It is the basic declaration of faith for the Jew. It is one of the first things a Jew learns as a child, and the last words one is to say before dying. All through life, one is to say the sentence twice a day without fail. It would seem that the Shema would be perfect to use as a mantra. The Talmud, however, discourages this as a practice and says that one who repeats the Shema should be silenced. The concept of the Shema is that of unity, and therefore it is meant to be said only once at a time. So he's starting his interpretation or his understanding of the Shema as a meditation of unity, of unification, by mentioning that if we use it as a mantra and repeat it, we are deviating from the principle of unification. The Talmud notes that the Shema has the unique ability to dispel the forces of evil. The Shema is said in bed, just before one goes to sleep at night. According to the Talmud, night is the time when the forces of evil are strongest, and the Shema has the power to protect us against them. This is not an area of knowledge about which I know. I'm not sure what the forces of evil are, but I can tell you that if you believe that your subconscious takes over at night and is responsible for producing your dreams then you could say that if you've had disturbing thoughts or disturbing reactions to experiences, then that's what's going to pop up at night. But if you say a declaration such as the Shema, which is this, as we'll get into it, which is this understanding of God, then you kind of program your subconscious to produce more favorable images, more favorable dreams at night. So in that way, maybe that's what we're talking about in one sense. When we say dispelling the forces of evil, we're talking about programming yourself so that your subconscious produces empowering dreams as opposed to threatening dreams. That's one angle we could take on this. The reason for this should be obvious. Evil has power only when it is seen as disconnected from God. If one thinks that there can be a force of evil apart from God, then one can be harmed by it. However, if a person recognizes that even evil is a creation of God, then it no longer has any power over him. God himself said through his prophet, this is Isaiah, I form light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I am God. I do all these things. All right, so now we're getting into pretty deep philosophic territory because he's basically putting forth the idea that God, Konei HaKol, God owns everything, God creates everything, including what we label as evil. And evil from God shouldn't have any power from you because you know it's from God and God's on your side. Evil that's disconnected from God is threatening. So at another time and a place, we really have to get into this because it brings up the notion that people can disconnect themselves from the Creator and they get offline, so to speak. And what they do is exactly against what God wants. So he's basically saying, he's basically answering that question. He's basically saying, well, we may think that what they're doing is disconnecting from God, and therefore there's a threat, but he's saying that's how we look at it. If we look at it as them not being disconnected from God, and the evil that they're perpetrating is part of God's creation, then it shouldn't be able to harm us. So this is a really huge leap into understanding, in the broadest sense, God as the creator of everything. So he tends to just take these leaps matter-of-factly. We're going to have to wrestle with it. But he continues, the Zohar explains the existence of evil with a parable. A king once wanted to test his son to see if he would be a worthy heir to the throne. He told his son to keep away from loose women and to remain virtuous. Then he hired a woman to entice his son, instructing her to use all her wiles with him. The Zohar then asks the rhetorical question, is the woman not also a loyal servant of the king? So in that sense, he's talking about evil coming from God in the form of a test for us. And he says, the purpose of evil is to tempt us and allow us to have free choice. Without the existence of evil, we would have no other choice but to do good, and there would be no virtue in the good we do. But since God gave us free will and wants us to do good as a matter of our own free choice, evil plays a highly important role in his plan. All right, so is he taking a tangent? Remember, we started talking about saying the Shema in bed, like Shema Hamita, the nighttime Shema, to ward off the forces of evil. And then he's talking about evil being sent by God to give us a choice of either doing good or bad, doing something evil, tempting us to do evil, or evil basically helping us make the resolution to not do evil, to do good. Okay, so does that mean that if we say the Shema at night, we're basically resolving ourselves to making a resolution to not be tempted by evil? Is that what he's saying? In the parable, as soon as the prince realizes that the woman is in the hire of his father, she is no longer a threat. The same is true of evil. Indeed, the Baal Shem Tov goes further in using this Zoharic teaching. He says, do not succumb to evil, emulate it. He explains that if evil is a loyal servant of the king, then you should be equally loyal. If evil does God's will, you should strive to do it equally well. So from that point of view, what is he talking about? So you have a king, the Zohar is describing, you have a king, he wants to see if a son is worthy of being the next king, and he gives his son instructions: stay away from loose women, remain virtuous. He hires a woman to tempt the son. So the son later realizes the woman is not really trying to tempt him. She's faking it because she was hired to do that. And therefore, he no longer considers her a threat, because he sees that she is not really a loose woman and a temptress, but she's really just a test hired by the king to test his virtue. Okay, so since it's not really a temptation, he doesn't feel threatened by it anymore. As an aside, my question would be, what if she wasn't in the employ of the king? What if she really was a loose woman and she was really trying to tempt him? Wouldn't that be a better test? I don't know. We'll have to wrestle with that at some point too. But then Rabbi Kaplan goes on to say, okay, you don't succumb to evil, you emulate it. What is that all about? This is what he says. He quotes the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Israel Meir HaKohen, who lived in the late 1800s to the early 1900s, the Chafetz Chaim. And he relates that he once woke up on a cold winter morning to say his prayers. The evil urge, the Yetzer Hara, said to him, how can you get up so early? You are already an old man and it's so cold outside. The Chafetz Chaim replied to the evil urge, you're a lot older than me and you're up already. This also illustrates the concept of emulating evil rather than succumbing to it. So that's a pretty smart remark. So he's saying, so part of the Chafetz Chaim is saying, don't worry about it. You're old. Who wants to schlep at the shul in the cold? And so the Chafetz Chaim turns the table and says, well, if you could do it, I could do it. So Rabbi Kaplan says, that's how we turn the tables. That's one way of turning the tables on evil and evil and the temptation to do evil by saying, hey, if you could do it, if you could remain loyal to God and be in the service of God as a tester of me, then I can certainly be loyal to God. Okay, so he's taken a tangent to try to help us understand how one application of the Shema is is an effort to try to use it for self-perfection and to try to strengthen our resolve to do good and not bad. Okay. And one way we use the Shema to do that is by reasoning how we can empower ourselves to be virtuous. Okay, one use of the Shema. In any case, the Shema declares that God is one. If God is one, then his purpose must also be one. Since God's purpose in creation was to do good, then the only reason that evil exists is to enhance the world's ultimate good. If a person has a deep realization of this, then the forces of evil have no power over him. This is really classic Kaplan reasoning. Okay, so this is his thought process is, okay, principle number one, God is one. Principle number two, God is good. So that's what we say. Okay. So therefore, his purpose is to do good because he's good. Therefore, there can't be anything bad or evil because everything's good. God is, if we said that there was not good as in addition to good, that defies the principle of God being one, having one purpose. So that's his thinking. It's kind of interesting, but this is classic Kaplan reasoning. So that's how he deduces logically that everything is for the good, and that if you think it's not, then you have to somehow reformulate your thinking to see the good in it, like a Gamzu Latova type of thing. Okay, he continues. He continues and he says, a paradigm of this attitude can be found in the great Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva lived in the 1st century Common Era. Rabbi Akiva's watchword always was, all that the merciful one does is for the good. Rabbi Akiva faced his greatest test during the Hadrianic persecutions of the Jews around 135's Common Era, so in the 2nd century too. The Romans had decreed that no one could teach Torah under penalty of death, but Rabbi Akiva ignored them and carried on his vocation as a Torah teacher. He was captured and sentenced to be killed by having his flesh torn away by curry combs in most excruciating torture. We read about this on Yom Kippur. Still, while he was being tortured to death in this manner, he told his students that he was happy since he had been given the opportunity to suffer and die as an expression of his love for God. Death and torture held no terror for him, since he had a love that was more powerful than death. And I think that in the davening, there's a further quote that attributes to Rabbi Akiva the idea that he said, I can finally understand what it means that God is one, I think. And then he says, significantly, Rabbi Akiva's last words were the Shema. Even in the midst of his most terrible suffering, he was able to see God's unity and oneness, right? We go over that. And therefore, he could see God even in his suffering. Rabbi Akiva had been a student of Nachum Ish Gamzu for 22 years. Nachum was called Gamzu because no matter what happened to him, he would say, this too is for the, Gamzu Latova comes from Nachum Ish Gamzu. Okay. That phrase, Gamzu Latova, this is also for the good, is attributed to Nachum Ish Gamzu, who was a Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva. Like his student, Nachum suffered terribly during his lifetime, but no matter what happened to him, he was able to see it as good. Okay, so Rabbi Kaplan is starting off by getting really philosophic in his description of the Shema as a meditative tool. And I think, and since he has said that the Shema is supposed to help us see things as being for the good, and since that helps us overcome evil, meaning feeling that things that we see as evil, not being threatened by them, I think we also have to say that it doesn't mean automatically we accept the situation. Like, for instance, somebody who's in prison, or somebody who's being discriminated against, or somebody who's being abused, or somebody who's being attacked, I think I want to add that they're entitled to say, I'm not accepting this. At some point, I might see this being for the good, but right now I've got to get this attacker off my back. I think that it's important to qualify this idea of Gamzu Latova, saying, yeah, there's a time and a place where you can say that, but if you're under attack or somehow being persecuted, that's not the time. So how do you then reconcile Rabbi Akiva basically saying, accepting being tortured to death? So I guess the difference is he had no ability to change his fate. He was just being tortured to death. And so he made the best of it. This is deep stuff, but we really need to get into this somehow and fit it into meditation. But that's the kind of questions we need to ask. Okay. Let's finish up this section. Let's check the time. It's really hot stuff. Let's finish up this section with say when you say the Shema. The Shema is an integral part of the morning Shacharit and evening Ma'ariv service. Together with a number of important prayers that surround it, it is said immediately before the Amidah. However, the Shema can also be said alone as an important meditation in its own right. From the wording itself, it is obvious that the Shema was meant to be a meditation. If the only significance of the Shema was to declare that God is one, then the opening words, listen Israel, Shema Yisrael, would be redundant. But the Shema itself is telling us to listen and hear the message with every fiber of our being. It is telling us to open our perceptions completely so as to experience God's unity. Okay, let's go over this again. It's said, obviously, part of a tzibur, part of a communal prayer with blessings before and after. And then you have the Amidah. And it can also be said alone. And he's stressing that saying it alone is especially fine for making a meditation. But we've already established that it's not a mantra meditation. We don't keep repeating it. Why? Because the whole principle about the Shema is unification. And if we keep saying it, we're making multiples of it, and that's against the principle of unification. So how is it a meditation? He's saying, well, it starts with the opening word, Shema Yisrael, listen Yisrael. But what are you listening to if you're saying it silently or if you're saying it by yourself? What are you listening to? Nobody's speaking. Who's speaking? He's basically saying, listen to the message, open your perceptions completely, and experience God's unity. So he's basically saying that saying the Shema, in particular by yourself, defining it as a meditation, taking seriously the command to listen, can be a meditation engaging every fiber of your being. Of course, that assumes that people actually know how to engage every fiber of their being, which is a lot easier said than done, and which he doesn't dwell on here, but we're really going to have to get into this because it's much easier said than done to have every fiber of your being be at full attention in the here and now. Totally mindful, your whole being totally mindful. And remember, he made the same point when we were learning about the Amida's meditation. And you are mind, body, spirit, so to speak, at full attention in front of Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Same kind of thing here. The first thing that comes to my mind is mind-body integration and actually being able to do some form, meditative form, Qigong, Kung Fu, Tai Chi, something that does mind-body integration. At some point, we really have to explore this because that's exactly what he's calling for. Okay. So as you can imagine, he's going to get pretty darn metaphysical here. And we're going to break it down into bite-sized pieces so that we can understand this and walk away with some real good insights here. Okay, let's see what Bhante has to say about mindfulness. We will continue with mindfulness. Mindfulness is the center of what he calls Vipassana meditation, and the meditation that insight meditation, the meditation that we do at the end of class. And it's the key to the whole process. It is both the goal of meditation and the means to that end. You reach mindfulness by being ever more mindful. He says another word for mindfulness implies non-negligence or absence of madness, according to his orientation to his native language, to mindfulness. Absence of madness. Mindfulness is absence of madness. One who attends constantly to what is really going on in the mind achieves the state of what he calls ultimate sanity, which actually I think makes a whole lot of sense. If when people how disturbed do people let themselves get when they let their thoughts run wild and drive themselves a little bit crazy? Oh, I'm going crazy thinking about this. How many times I am going crazy thinking about this? That's you going crazy thinking about this. It's not like you're crazy, you're driving yourself crazy. So I'm trying to think in Hebrew. Oh. Seichel? I think it's Seichel. There's a word, I think it is Seichel. There's a word that means in Hebrew, in the one sense, intelligent, and the other side, foolish. I think we'll look that up. I think it's Seichel, which there's many Hebrew words that mean the opposites, like shalom means hello and goodbye, for instance. And hate means both sin and purification. I think it's seichel that means on the one hand intelligent, clever, and the other side foolish. So I think we have an understanding of that. And he says there's another term that related to mindfulness that bears the connotation of remembering. It is not memory in the sense of ideas and pictures from the past, but rather clear, direct, wordless knowing of what is and what is not, of what is correct and what is incorrect, of what we are doing and how we should go about it. Mindfulness reminds meditators to apply their attention to the proper object at the proper time and to exert precisely the amount of energy needed to do that job. When this energy is properly applied, a meditator stays constantly in a state of calm and alertness. As long as this condition is maintained, those mind states called hindrances or psychic irritants cannot arise. There is no greed, hatred, lust, or laziness. So he's emphasizing what he emphasized last week, which is mindfulness helps you remember what you're supposed to be doing, how you're supposed to be doing it at all times. You are remembering yourself, what you've been taught to do. You can, if you go to a shul, and there's a saying a lot of times in the Beit HaMedrash that says, know before whom you stand. And that's a mindfulness that you are remembering, I'm a Jew, I've been taught how to behave in shul, I've been taught what the purpose of this room is. Okay, I remember, yeah. It's that kind of memory, not remembering to put the groceries away. It's an internal remembering of who you are and what your mission is at that point in time. So mindfulness helps you do that. So we need to, when we said last week that things like a mezuzah or tefillin or our physical pointers to be mindful, that wearing that tefillin or wearing the talis with the fringes as opposed to, yes, seeing those things makes me remember, I got to be a good boy. I got to do the mitzvot or whatever it is. Okay, they trigger mindfulness. These things trigger mindfulness. So like we said last week, the daily Jewish living is highly dependent on mindfulness to carry out the work that a Jew is supposed to do. Okay. This has been an earful. We're going to continue this next week. Let me see if I can figure out how to stop this recording. Hopefully it doesn't do it.